Now, I get to introduce my friend, great library supporter, intellectual leader in our country, Carl Schramm. And Carl, may I call you up and I will, from my detailed notes here, the actual introduction. I have all these books that Carl has written here. It's kind of heavy. That'll give you an idea of the intellectual weight at the Kauffman Foundation.
Right.
And the Kauffman Foundation has become a leading intellectual entrepreneur in the United States under Carl's leadership. He became the CEO in 2002. He's been a professor at Johns Hopkins, chaired commissions on healthcare, cost containment, things like that in the state of Maryland. Was head of a division of Fortis, their health insurance division, invented various forms of health insurance when he was there. We'll talk about some of the things that he's written over the years, the books that he's published, but he's become an intellectual leader on the subjects that the Kauffman Foundation was founded to promote and to provide leadership on entrepreneurship and education. So would you welcome, please, Carl Schramm. I believe some of that was true, right? Is that correct? Yeah, right. So Carl, could we start off by talking a little bit about Ewing Kauffman and his inspiration, his own entrepreneurial spirit, and his inspiration for the Kauffman Foundation? Where did the Kauffman Foundation come from in Ewing Kauffman's life?
Well, first of all, I want to make a couple of qualifications. First of all, thank you for having me here. Is everything that Crosby says, but he doesn't say it because modesty holds him back from talking about how I think unique this library is and the leadership position it has as an instigation of community intellectual inquiry. This is really an extraordinary thing. Now, as to Mr. Kauffman, Crosby asked about the spirit of Mr. Kauffman, and in fact, that's all I know because I didn't have the extraordinary experience of knowing Mr. Kauffman, and I say on a second-hand way, it must have been extraordinary because I never ever met any single person who ever really met Mr. Kauffman who didn't speak in terms of an outsized figure. He's quite an extraordinary man. And if you think about Ewing Kauffman, there are very few people who, when they are dead, continue to expand in history. Really, if you think about it. Politicians die and they generally, somebody writes a book about them once in a while, but there are very few people who really expand in death. And as you know, the Mexican, we're right at Halloween, the custom is to go to cemeteries and celebrate the dead, and you're not really dead until nobody comes to celebrate over your grave. And you know, Mr. Kauffman in those terms is never going to die spiritually. And the remarkable thing about Mr. Kauffman, and by the way, in a way we're unique in the sense that foundations generally, when the founder's gone, and Mr. Kauffman died in '93, foundations have this terrible problem of, in many cases, repudiating the founder. People who take over foundations generally are utopianists and they want to save the world, and more often than not, or at least in a large number of cases, they see the founder as some greedy, hideous capitalist who did nothing but bad things in his life, and thank God he gave them the money to do the foundation because they'll correct everything he did wrong. And we're not in that position at all. Kauffman was astoundingly clever in two respects. One, Mr. Kauffman studied foundations. Now, Mr. Kauffman was not a scholar. He was a huge reader, but he studied foundations for 5 years before he died, and he wrote to us extensively, and he gave 12 hours of video interviews as to what this foundation was supposed to be about. In the world of foundations, we have the largest donor intent of any foundation in the United States, i.e. we know what the donor intended. And he was very, very clear. One thing he said is, I don't want this to be the Ford Foundation. He said that. He also said specific things unique to what he wanted about us, and among other things, he said he wanted ours to be the greatest foundation, the best foundation in the United States. And then, to the second thing that he did, he saw his own journey from poverty to a billionaire as a common event for people if they reached for it. He said again and again, I am a common man who could do uncommon things. And the uncommon thing I did was create this huge drug company. I'm a guy who never went to college. Look what I did. And by the way, it was my way out of poverty. It should be everybody else's. So I'm creating a foundation that celebrates entrepreneurship and tries to make it an accessible journey for anybody who wants to try it. Mr. Kauffman had a particular sense about the poor and minorities, as this was their way to, in fact, grab and make their own life and establish self-respect in the purpose of it. And he brings it all together in this famous quotation in our world. Every time we help an entrepreneur start a business, we strengthen the national economy. Now, I like to say that Ewing Kauffman knew more about economics than certainly the advisors to this president and the last president, okay, that got us into this mess and can't get us out of this mess. Mr. Kauffman would know how to get us out of this mess. He'd say you rely on new firms. Help the new firms. Don't help the old firms. New firms challenge the old firms. They disturb the what we call the incumbent firms. Okay, you don't bail out big firms. You let new firms start. And with this dynamism, you'll create a lot more jobs. New firms create jobs. Old firms destroy jobs. And you'll strengthen the whole economy. And you open all kinds of avenues of opportunity for people. So I give you a spiritual answer, Crosby.
And that's a great answer, Carl. When you arrived at the foundation, maybe some of that vision was being lost. There was some controversy when you got here because you reoriented the foundation. It had been giving to lots and lots of small grants. It had a very large staff, over 300 people, if I remember. 200 people, one of the largest staffs of a foundation its size in the country.
The largest.
The largest, and had maybe lost the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, you talk in some things you've written about the purpose, what the purpose of foundations ought to be from the early days, from Benjamin Franklin establishing some of the first philanthropic organizations like the Philadelphia Hospital, the American Philosophical Society, that a guy like Franklin and the early entrepreneurs, Rockefeller and the leadership of his foundation, were themselves participants in the intellectual life of the country in innovating and creating and experimenting. And so you came to Kansas City with that goal. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I did. Actually, it's funny. I didn't realize this for a long time later. As Crosby said, I had been a professor at Johns Hopkins for 15 years. And I was doing really some of the first work in health finance. And it was lavishly supported by foundations. You know, I started the first academic center that looked at healthcare finance in the nation, and it was at Johns Hopkins. But I didn't quite understand till I took this job that I felt frustration, and I was lavishly funded. But the foundations would never do the cutting edge stuff that I wanted to do. They would always say, well, you can do this, but you know, I'm not sure our trustees will go for a real examination of doctors' incomes. Okay, they will be worried if you say, you know, we ought to relook at the nurse labor market, right? Do we need nurses? Do we need more doctors? Okay, you know, fundamental, important questions, which some of your audience is already smiling at, because common sense would tell you, you know, there's something wrong with the nurse-doctor-hospital combination that costs so much, but we take it as a given, so we can't even talk about it. But when I got to this foundation, after having spent 20 years in the private sector, roughly, here I was at a foundation, and I didn't quite understand all my discontents with foundation life or what they did until I got here. And you know, Mr. Kauffman was our inspiration in the sense that Mr. Kauffman had said, if you would read Mr. Kauffman, if you looked at Mr. Kauffman, he permitted me to say, you know, he wanted this to be a different type of foundation, to be out at the edge and to be intellectually driven. it's not like he gave me license. He says, I want this foundation to be filled with the smartest people on its staff that could possibly work in foundations. These are his words.
Right.
Okay? Mr. Kauffman wasn't in the least bit frightened of PhDs. He absorbed them like crazy. So when we got here, we actually got into the business of trying to make a foundation that has a lot of money, but not enough money to make change. That's one of the things people didn't understand here in Kansas City in particular. You know, people here see the Kauffman Foundation as a giant piggy bank. You have $2 billion, just give us some money. But if you're trying to change national and international global welfare, which is what the Kauffman Foundation tries to do, every foundation should be in the business of expanding human welfare. Mr. Kauffman saw that. But he said do it by growing economies. Make people wealthier, make economies wealthier, and welfare will increase for all. Well, you know, if that's your mission, $2 billion ain't much money. $2 billion is no money at all. So the leverage you got to affect is the leverage of ideas, which is why all these books flow out of the Kauffman Foundation.
You talked in one of your articles about the foundation world, the history of foundations and where Kauffman fits in it. You quote from Jacques Barzun in his book, The House of Intellect, about the projectism and the bureaucracy of foundations, and how they stop being about ideas and come to be about the zeitgeist, the trends, the whatever. And they're constantly trying to, I think the phrase was, fix the past.
Yes.
And your view is they should invent the future.
Yeah, the Kauffman Foundation, we don't fix the past. We are about inventing the future. That's one of our management memes. And that is just, that in the world of foundations, that's breaking the stick. Because foundations are all about trying to get to root causes. Foundations grew up in the progressive era. And progressives were also about trying to go back. Actually, the progressive movement in many ways is a very retroactive movement. It wants beautifully built books, beautifully built houses, arts and crafts houses. We go back to the pre-industrial age. And it's oddly weird. Like so many things in intellectual life, it looks like one thing, but there's a current quite the opposite running underneath it. And in the world of foundations, which looked like a phenomenal institutional innovation in the first part of the last century, when captured by intellectuals, they were all trying to get back to the root causes of poverty. Why do we have poverty? And you know, today the issues of root causes is, why did, let's say, the family disintegrate, particularly minority families, particularly black families? Why did they disintegrate? Well, it might be nice to get to the answer, but we're not going to, if we had the absolute answer, what could we do about it? I mean, what could we do about it? Okay? So the issue is, in a sense, I don't play golf, but the one good thing comes out of golf is one single statement. You have to play the ball where it lies. Okay?
Right.
I suppose there are other good things that came out of golf. They figured out.
Mark Twain said it was a good walk spoiled.
Yeah, you know, if without golf we wouldn't know how to make grass green, I suspect.
Right.
But, you know, you play the ball where it lies. That's the social condition. That's the social problem at the moment. What do we do to fix it?
And so Ewing sets up a foundation that's to look at promoting entrepreneurship and education. You've got, in one of these pieces, you quote Robert Barrow, the great economist, on Bill Gates, about what the influence of Bill Gates on the world is greater from what he's done with Microsoft than with the foundation. Talk about that a little bit in its relationship to entrepreneurship.
Well, remember now, the Gates Foundation, I think, probably has assets closing in on $40 billion. You could do a lot of good with $40 billion. By the way, to Bill Gates' credit, he publicly talks about the mistakes of his foundation, to his great, great credit. You know, they've taken some very bad turns in education. He's the first to talk about it. They're very worried about their impact on malaria in
Africa. They've overspent in certain areas, draining money from.
And they're understanding the distortions in the labor markets they make when they take the smartest people out and make them work for the foundation in a non-profit, economic role.
In places like Africa.
Yeah, and they make dependency out of the smartest part of the organization. Anyway, but to talk about it, it's the same thing with Mr. Kauffman. Now, Mr. Kauffman built the company, and he gave $700 million to the foundation when it started through our very good management. You know, our foundation is close to $2 billion after giving away $1.5 billion since
Wow.
1993. But he gives $700 million to start us off. And if you don't think that the gain to society from Marion Laboratories was more than $700 million, you're crazy, okay? The gain to society out of the drugs Mr. Kauffman helped to invent and distribute, and the way he helped invent the way drugs are distributed, and the companies, you know, at least 80 companies came out of Marion Laboratories that are still making wealth, okay? And Marion Laboratories now still survives in Sanofi. Probably Mr. Kauffman's contributions to welfare, if they're measurable at all, are in the tens, certainly in the tens and tens, if not well into the hundreds of millions of dollars. That is life years saved by his drugs, secure families made in Kansas City by the people who got jobs there, okay? And all the fallout of kids who grew up in secure homes of parents who worked for Marion and whatnot. And then the benefit of the foundation. But the foundation, I just think it's impossible, given that I'm the smartest president of any foundation ever, very clever, know how to do leverage, all that kind of stuff, okay? We could never hope ever at the Kauffman Foundation or the Gates Foundation to have the gain on welfare of the inventor. In Bill Gates's case, every single person in this room is wealthier today than you would have been if Gates hadn't put Microsoft together. Every single one of us, whether you use a computer or not, the efficiency gains in our economy are overwhelming because of the stuff Gates kept pushing.
And the word push is interesting. You talk in one of your articles about the push-pull phenomenon, where things really happen. And it seems to me that Steve Jobs, who just died and who could be compared to Bill Gates and is maybe the greatest, other than Gates, the greatest entrepreneur of our time, is an example of this. Nobody knew that they needed one of these 10 years ago, an iPad, my iPad that I got this weekend, by the way. So I'm pretty proud, that's why,
yeah.
Anyway.
Welcome to the present, Crosby.
Right, yeah, exactly, thank you. Yeah, I have to get rid of that landline I've got now. We didn't know we needed Microsoft Windows. We didn't know we needed an iPad, an iPhone, a Mac. The inventors, the creators, the real entrepreneurs are pushing something onto us. Or I'm not sure how you define the push-pull idea, but
no, I think they're pushing because one of my constructions about what entrepreneurs do is they teach the human family about needs we didn't know we needed. That's what entrepreneurs do. And it is a push phenomenon. Okay, but you only have to push a little, and then people say, how could we have lived without it? Imagine your life without, well, if I ask you in a week, you'll say, I can't imagine my life before the iPad. Just imagine it, you know. Imagine your life without the thought that, God forbid, you got breast cancer, okay, or you had a broken knee. Imagine your life if you sat there thinking, holy smokes, I'll die if I get it, or if I break my knee, I'll never be able to walk again. Some entrepreneur invented prosthetics that when people get these transplants, they say, I walk like I was 20. These are entrepreneurs.
And so let me take you back. I think everybody in the room would like to know a little bit about where you came from and where these ideas come from. You grew up in upstate New York, mm-hmm. and you went to parochial school.
I went to Parish High School. Mm-hmm.
Parish High School, and that obviously had some effect on you. Or
well,
not?
It did. In retrospect, I would have been taller, but for the routine punishments that were visited upon me by Sister Mario. Anyway, God rest her soul. I hope nobody's at her picnic tonight or last night. Anyway, I don't mean that.
And
she taught me a great deal. First of all, I grew up in upstate New York, and upstate New York is a fantastic study in economics. When I was a boy, New York State was the Empire State. We were the richest state, the most populous state. The state ran fantastically. You were proud of being a New Yorker. It's hard to imagine what I'm about to say. And you sort of felt sorry for people who weren't New Yorkers. They weren't New York State. We had a board of regents. We had the best high school. I have a New York State Regents diploma, which when I got it, I understood I was better than almost everybody else. We had regents, okay? We had the best. It's nothing to laugh at. In my day, a New York State Regents diploma counted for a great deal.
And New York State was the wealthiest state in the wealthiest country.
Yeah, yeah. Now look what it is. Now why was New York so rich? Well, actually there's a little tie here to Missouri. It was the Erie Canal that made New York rich. And made it rich, you can't imagine how rich it made it. The Mohawk Valley that ran out with the canal to Buffalo, so you connected the Hudson River in New York City, the great port, to the Midwest. In 1920, tax returns in Buffalo, New York were almost 20% higher than they were in New York City. That's how wealthy Buffalo was. Buffalo was astoundingly wealthy. 80+% of all the grain in the Midwest went across the Great Lakes on boats and was loaded on trains in Buffalo and went to New York, Boston, and Baltimore for export to Europe. Now along the way, in those cities, Schenectady, the home of General Electric, Syracuse, the home of the typewriter, among other things, the stoplight, Rochester, Eastman Kodak's, among millions of other things, Buffalo, the first electrified city in America. This was America's Silicon Valley. The wealth in New York State, the creativeness. New York still has the most number of engineering schools and produce more engineers than any other state in the country. It was, actually today, Rochester, New York on a per capita basis is the most populous patent holding city in America. This was New York State. And that was the Silicon Valley. And it's a great case study in how a state can commit suicide.
Right, and New York City is still the great cultural center of the world, so it survives well. But the rest of New York State, Buffalo is probably the most obvious example. Is
all of those cities are failed, collapsing cities, right. Every one of them.
And what do you attribute that to? What you said?
State policy.
State policy.
We got lavish in our spending. We were going to build a huge university system, among other things. The greatest social welfare system, right? Mm-hmm. One of the first states to.
And if you look at Albany, the huge buildings that Nelson Rockefeller built, the Brasilia of the United States.
He said, "Well, we can do this in New York. We're like a big nation." And you go look at the state capitol in Albany, and you think back in 2011, saying, "What were these people thinking of? Did they not see the future?" But it's the same with the auto companies, you know, and people got crazy and lavish in many ways with the labor costs of the state. But anyway, that was that.
So
you wanted to ask me
you go
about
to
my
Lemoyne College
school.
and you go to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And you get your PhD at Wisconsin.
I should stop at my parochial school and just say something really important, because it influences the way I think about our new Kauffman charter school. My school had 1,200 kids in it, and it had 26 nuns and 4 lay women, and we had one man in the building. He was a janitor, generally drunk by 12 o'clock, okay? Mr. Fenton. You can't believe what order was. We had 60 kids in each homeroom, okay? Now, this school was in an affluent parish, Irish and German affluent. And the message in our school, I like to say, you know, I grew up in a Korean school. There were no Asian Americans in our school at all, okay? But it was like a Korean school, because the message was, look, you're Catholic, and it's a hostile world out there to Catholics, so you're gonna have to do better. And we also had exemplars in our school. Father Hesburgh had gone to our school, who was the preeminent civil rights champion and then president of Notre Dame University. He sat in your seats, we were told. When I was in high school, a member of Lyndon Johnson's cabinet had sat in your seats. The chairman of the board of Allied Chemical sat in those seats. 4 mayors of Syracuse have sat in this school's seats, okay? A member of the New York State Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, sat in this. This was the contemporary achievement of your school, okay? This is what's expected of you, and this is what you can do. And the reason you do this is you overperform. Okay? So now listen to what I told you. Okay? We didn't have tuition at our school. It came off of the parish dues. Okay? These were people, our school was a brutal, disciplined place, as you can imagine. 26 nuns, 1,200 kids, right? It was also a school that ran on every minute a demonstration of love. Okay, it wasn't love. No, Sister Hortense was not a lovely person. And you were never in a love relationship, agape or eros, with any of these people, okay? There was nothing to love here, okay? But the demonstration of these people, it was a school of love. And it was a school of high efficiency and high order. And so what's the missing ingredient in our education? You know, and every kid, almost every kid, had Regents diplomas. So there was no fooling around that this was second-tier schooling, right? Regents diplomas. And it's really important because we're not going back to fix the past, but the past hollers out to us about models that work when the values are right. See, the values don't change in time. We like to escape the values, we like to invent new values, we certainly like to torque the values, but the values don't change.
And so you come out...
I went into a Jesuit college in town. I had a fantastic liberal arts education. Every kid had to have a minor in philosophy. And so it astounds me when kids come to work for us at the Kauffman Foundation from very fancy East Coast colleges. And I make an allusion to Plato, and then I say, have you ever read Plato? No. Aristotle? No. Socrates? No. I don't know what's going on in college anymore. But anyway, and then I went to the University of Wisconsin immediately because the draft was underway. And the last thing I wanted to do was do anything that might get me shot up. So I thought becoming a PhD was a much better option. And that's what I did. So you want to talk about lavish?
And you got
say just one thing about lavish. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lavish.
Lavish. I graduated in sort of the middle of my high school class, right? So I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I qualified for a New York State Regents Fellowship. Right? So once a semester, I had to go over to the bursar's office at the University of Wisconsin and have my check from the citizens of the state of New York. Is that nuts? Was that crazy? It was insane.
But you have this educational career at Wisconsin, PhD at Wisconsin, and you got a law degree at Georgetown.
Yeah.
And you became a professor at Johns Hopkins. And this sounds like the opposite of an entrepreneurial career. But you became an entrepreneur yourself in the healthcare field. Mm-hmm. So how does that happen? I mean,
well, it's a wonderful experience in a way. First of all, to the point, yeah. Well, I was sort of living a non-entrepreneur's life. With two observations. One is, Muhammad Yunus was done to the Kauffman Foundation some years ago, and lots of what...
You explain who Muhammad Yunus is.
Who won the Nobel Prize for inventing micro-lending in Bangladesh. There's a lot of controversy around it, like there is about lots of Nobel Prizes. But anyway, for whatever, you could read the controversy yourself. He did say something very smart and basic. He said, I think we're all entrepreneurs. All people are entrepreneurs. Only lucky people figure it out. So that's the first observation. I got lucky and figured it out. Second, you know, when you're a professor at a place like Johns Hopkins, you're an entrepreneur and you don't even know it, because Hopkins is the university in the world's history that has the highest amount of sponsored research of any university in the world. So if you're a professor, your life is to get grants. You're selling yourself daily. You know, when I left Johns Hopkins in the mid-1980s, I had $3.5 million a year of sponsored research. That doesn't happen if you're not entrepreneurial, right? So entrepreneurs come in many flavors. But then one day I was doing some research on hospital mergers, and I became an expert witness in all the major antitrust cases when hospitals wanted to merge. And one day a very wealthy law firm it doesn't matter that the law firm was wealthy, they were representing an extremely wealthy, huge hospital, Hospital Corporation of America wanted to buy a hospital down in North Carolina. And other hospitals were contesting it on the grounds that if they had too much concentration, prices of hospitals would go up. So I said to the lawyers, you know, I can settle this empirically. And if anybody knows anything about expert witnessing, it's in your own self-interest, because if you're an expert witness, you're asked to give an opinion, and then the other side beats the living daylights out of you for days and days. You said this, and you said this, and you're trying to convince the judge that you're an expert, and they pulverize you. It's not pleasant. So I said to the lawyers, you know, I can settle this empirically. We're going to win this case. They said, well, what do you do? I said, I have to have the accounting data on every hospital in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia, I guess, okay? But it'll cost you a lot. They said, cost is no object, okay? So I went out and hired a lot of people, and then we dug up in the Blue Cross basements all the hospital accounting data ever. I was the first person to ever develop a database of comparative hospital accounting data, ever. I couldn't believe it, because at that time, Ernst & Young, a national accounting firm, was auditing 800 hospitals, but they never ever brought the data together. So I was the first person who could say, you know, St. Mary's is efficient and St. Joseph's is a wreck. So anyway, I won the case for him. I went to the Supreme Court. We won, bang. Okay, we went to the Supreme Court. Okay, then I had all this data, and this is the important entrepreneurs thing. Okay, this happens to entrepreneurs all the time. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur, but I looked at this data and it was like, boom. You know, it's like Paul on the road to Damascus. I said, there's a company. I sell this data to Hospital A, what Hospital B efficiency rates are in the emergency room. They're doing emergency surgery for 40% less than you are, right? I'll help you figure out why. Well, hospitals, you know, are competitive, right? They're so competitive they could care less. Fat, happy, and really stupid. And therein, I'm doing what all entrepreneurs risk, calling your potential customer dumb.
Right.
Because I thought they should pay me about $100,000 a year on a subscription basis, and the most I could get was $11,000, averaging $7,000. I was going to go broke. It would cost a lot of money to get the state in. And then a second thing happened that is in the story of every entrepreneur. I thought I was doing this company, but it took me a moment to figure out that this company wasn't what this company was, because I wasn't making any money. So entrepreneurs are very good at jumping on the next horse. And to make a long story short, it turned out the data I had was actually going to be the backbone of hospital insurance, bond insurance. All hospitals sell bond insurance, but the people who issue the bonds couldn't judge the credit worthiness of the hospital. They would send a group down, they'd go to the cafeteria, they'd talk to the chief nun, they'd talk to the chief of accounts, you know, and they'd say, well, I guess this looks like an A credit. But it was just windage, right? And suddenly I came along and we made the whole market scientific, and that was that. So.
And so you create a strong consulting business, you various things in the healthcare field. There are rumors that you were engaged in creating one of the great public relations successes in the history of American politics, Harry and Louise. Is this true? Did you know Harry and Louise personally?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But I know a lot about them.
I know a lot about them. Okay, well, so...
You're going to visit that subject and make me unpopular?
No, I promise I won't.
Okay.
Actually, the subject I do want to visit, so you come to the Kauffman Foundation.
I'm actually proud of that moment.
Yes. Okay, we'll talk about it.
No, I'm not.
Okay, don't talk about it.
I'm proud of a lot of things I don't want to talk about,
all right.
You know?
Come see me later. You get to the Kauffman Foundation, and you begin to redefine the whole notion of entrepreneurship. But one thing you said about entrepreneurship that I think is important is you say it is our, I think meaning the United States or any developed or developing economy, central comparative advantage.
Mm-hmm. It's ours, America's.
Ours.
There's only one other country that can claim it. You know, there are two satellite economies of America. There's Ireland and there's Israel. And Israel gets entrepreneurship. certainly as well as we do. But if you just look at on a comparative basis, we found more companies on a per capita basis than any other country in the world except Israel. So it is our comparative advantage. We can make our own wealth. We can regenerate ourselves. In the United States, in good times, we bring about 30 businesses a year across the billion-dollar sales mark, which is quite extraordinary. Europe has done that in the last 20 years, all of Europe for four companies. Okay? Israel does it for about 8 to 11 on an annualized basis. This is an extraordinary capacity in the United States.
And it's fairly recent in Israel that they've done that for a long time.
Yeah.
They weren't, you've applied the theory of entrepreneurship, your concept of entrepreneurship in some of the most interesting places. You've written an article in Foreign Affairs magazine, I hold it here, called Expeditionary Economics. Mm-hmm. And if I understand correctly, the Pentagon asked you to go to Iraq and to look at the situation for creating small businesses in Iraq, and in your book.
That's not quite right. I went with the Council on Foreign Relations.
Council on Foreign Relations.
And the folks who are interested in this, it turns out the wonderful proximity of Kansas City. Largely, I didn't grow up here, as you know. I grew up in Syracuse, but I'm amazed at Kansas City's total lack of understanding of how close we are to Fort Leavenworth. And how important Fort Leavenworth is. You've referenced the command school in the introduction. Yeah. The command school is where, it's called the intellectual heart of the United States Army. It's 40 minutes away from here. There are brilliant people sitting out there who never are asked to come down here, don't communicate much with us, and we don't communicate at all with them as a city. But in any event, there is one intellectual brain trust out there. And that's where actually it was just totally fortuitous that as these thoughts were coming together in Kansas City, the take-up happened to be in Fort Leavenworth. And in fact, a general went to Iraq from the command school who basically socialized these ideas. These ideas are quite controversial.
In the book that you've written with Bob Lighton and William Baumol, Good Capitalism, Bad Capitalism, you talk about the four things that underlie
bad capitalism, good capitalism.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Oh, I'm sorry. You called it by its right title.
Oh, good.
I'm sorry.
You talk about the four structures that you need to promote economic growth, and the very first one, which relates to what you did in Iraq and Afghanistan, is how easy is it to start a small business? I mean, it's a very simple thing.
Yeah.
And you were on the Charlie Rose show. I saw you one night on the Charlie Rose show, and Charlie Rose was asking you about that, and you gave him a description, a measurement, if you will, of 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months. And what did you find in Iraq?
Well, first of all, let me say something very important. I don't want anybody here to have the mistaken impression that I'm the Kauffman Foundation. I have the task and duty and wonderful responsibility of running the Kauffman Foundation. But there are people like my colleague Bob Lighton who if I stopped doing this job and wrote books the rest of my life, I first of all couldn't catch up with Bob Lighton. And I could never write anything as smart as Bob Lighton. Bob Lighton came when I got here. I couldn't believe my good luck. We got the senior-most economist of the Brookings Institution to move to Kansas City and become the head of research at the Kauffman Foundation. This was an extraordinary change in our culture, and it was like, when I talked to Julie Irene about the many wonderful things that have happened at the Kauffman Foundation since I've been there, I keep saying, these can't be accidental, these wonderful assets that accumulate at the Kauffman Foundation. We now are in such a wonderful position, Crosby, that you can't believe eminent people call us and ask if they can work with us or come to work here in Kansas City. And Julie Irene always says, well, that's my father watching over you.
Right.
Okay. She
right.
We started with the spiritual, right. Kauffman, and there are a lot of days when I think he's sitting in the chair next to me saying, watch what's going to happen on that next phone call. Okay, because these phone calls happen and they're quite extraordinary. But anyway, back to your issue about the starting of businesses. You know, in the United States, we can start a business. In the course of the time Crosby and I talk, you can start 3 or 4 businesses. You can be on the internet. You can go up to the state of Vermont, which we've worked on a program in Vermont. You can register your company online from your home in Kansas City and be incorporated in Vermont in seconds. And you can get you can get your federal EIN number on the computer from the federal government, so you can hire people, and you can be in business in a matter of minutes in the United States. Now, think of that as a cultural premise. We don't even think about it. You can set up an artificial person in a corporation. We do it, okay? We do it. We could all go home and do it tonight. We could do it 3 or 4 times tonight.
Remember, we're in Kansas City, so it might be a little more difficult. But
No, it wouldn't be the least bit more difficult, because I told you as a jurisdiction, you just go do it in Vermont.
Right.
You know, it doesn't matter where you register, okay? But in many cities, there's a wonderful book by Hernando de Soto called The Mystery of Capitalism. I think that's the title.
That's it, yeah.
You know, he's working in Peru at great risk to himself, by the way. Great risk to himself. He's been shot at and bombed and everything else. Because he's a counter voice basically saying, look, against the socialism of South America, there ought to be free market capitalism. One reason you can't get it started is it takes forever, 2, 3, 4 years to get a license to incorporate a business. And in a lot of places, that's the case. You can't even demonstrate private property. So that's a huge advantage, and it's become one of our, when we have outbound messages into the world, we talk about this metric of how quick it is to start a company and how secure you are in the ownership interests of the company.
Right. So the second of your 4 institutional supports is the rule of law, and the necessity of that. In expeditionary economics and foreign affairs, you talk about how we did exactly the wrong thing in Iraq because we supported all the large American companies and NGOs, the non-governmental, all the money. Instead of creating small businesses, local firms in Iraq, we ended up spending a huge amount of money with American and British and other large corporations, some of whom, as we now know, didn't do well with the money.
Right. I sat with General Petraeus in Bahrain, and he said, you know, we've got to get General Electric to come over here. And I thought, oh man, you know, General Electric's a big rent taker, as we economists call them. It has to operate with big federal government subsidy. You know, if General Electric didn't have federal contracts, it'd be out of business in 3 or 4 years.
Right. Much has been made of the fact that they don't pay any taxes. They don't pay any taxes because they take advantage of every federal tax credit.
But the notion of indigenous growth out of entrepreneurs in Iraq, which is insane because Iraq had a very flourishing economy. It's a very well-educated population relative to the Arab world. You know, but we don't understand that. We think we have to go in with NGOs and nurse people along and carry them through and have our big companies there and our big nonprofit organizations, all of which, of course, take federal money. And it's just such a wrong model. I have a piece coming out in the Wall Street Journal next week on the 50th anniversary of USAID, which is today the 2nd?
Today is the 2nd.
Yeah, tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of USAID. USAID has never once helped a company. It can't demonstrate one country where it's had any impact on the growth rate of the country. Why? They're not in the least bit interested in growth. An American agency that exists because of the growth of the American economy goes abroad and treats people like they're babies and incapable of starting their own economies. I mean, the wreckage of this type of philosophy, it's why ideas are so important. We have an outbound agency that never talks about growth as a possible outcome in Africa. You know, the posture of USAID throughout the Cold War was there would never be growth in India because they're a Hindu country and individual action is just out of the bounds. It's this sort of, you know, anthropology abhors growth thesis, okay?
Oops.
And, you know.
That certainly turned out to be wrong.
It certainly turned out to be terribly wrong. Same thing in China.
Well, and Kauffman has been, under your leadership, the primary intellectual sponsor of the idea that growth in jobs. I mean, what we're all concerned about in the United States and around the world today, with all the upsets in Europe and Asia and our own unemployment rate, how do we grow jobs? And Kauffman research has shown that small businesses, firm creation is where it's at. That's the center of this. And you've got your piece.
You use this phrase. I just want to stop and I want to, in Yiddish terms, I want to quell, because Crosby says Kauffman research. Now, I bet most folks here don't
Research
understand.
by scholars supported by Kauffman.
Yeah, no, but the point I wanted to say is this. Most people in Kansas City don't understand that at 4801 Rock Hill Road is an agency or an institution. It's the largest funder of private economic research in the United States. That's the Kauffman Foundation. So when Crosby says Kauffman research shows, and one of the reasons I'm sort of smiling here is, by now, if we've done our job, lots of people in this room know that all new net job creation is in firms less than 5 years old. You've heard that a lot lately, because politicians know that because the Kauffman Foundation basically discovered that. Okay. The beginnings of understanding how to fix this economy in many regards are at the door of politicians and to some economists because of Kauffman-sponsored research. And we're not researchers like at a university. I've obviously worked in one of the world's greatest universities. We are very pragmatic researchers. This book is both an academic book. It's published by Yale. It's the second largest seller in Yale History's press, the press's history. It's in 12 languages. Probably more people have read this book in China than in all the English-speaking world, okay? It's written, this is Bob and me, we wrote this down the street. And these data are all important to understanding the phenomenon of how economies start. If I could, just think about this for a moment. Think if USAID had actually embraced growth as the objective. The day we went into Iraq, if in fact we would have gone into Iraq, that's how powerful these data are. If we didn't know we could start an economy so we could get out and we could sustain a democracy, which is why we went, would we have gone? Or would we have gone completely differently with our kinetic strategy? And the day we got there, we began building the economy for the post-conflict era. We're all through this whole thing from a kinetic perspective, and there's no new business. And Iraq has at least a candle of hope. Afghanistan, it's totally hopeless. And we have all these agencies abroad that solicit your money, and they have names, and you think they're wonderful agencies because they're about helping people and whatnot. My view is they are racist, because they don't think people who aren't white can't start businesses. They propagate dependency. The premise is that backward people can't be self-sufficient. And worse, they spread cramped visions for whole societies. If we could grow, they could grow. My favorite observation is, the United States starts its economy after it won a war with the wealthiest country in the world that hated us. After the war, they set out to break us because they were going to take us over again. That's America. We didn't have any venture capital help from abroad. We didn't have any banks from England trying to help us out. We bootstrapped this whole blessed thing. That's our history. Are we smarter than all the people in Africa, in Asia? Who says? Now, we were different in the sense that we came to a new land, and the people who came were all people who came to get away from something and to make something better. Okay, but if it's the aspirational difference, do you think the people in Africa have a different aspiration? They don't aspire to that which anthropologists tell them they ought to embrace, because they've never existed. You're going to have the utopian peaceful society. They want modern hospitals, they want beautiful universities, and they want better futures for their kids.
Well, in India and China, which you talk a lot about in Good Capitalism, Bad Capitalism, and other writings, you challenge the idea, as you just have, that there's something inherent in culture that prevents economic growth and individual aspiration and entrepreneurial businesses. Talk for a second about the importance of education, because the other piece of the Kauffman Foundation, which is very important, you're starting a charter school now. You were involved, you and I were involved together a little bit in the Time to Get It Right report, Benno Schmidt and Jim Duderstadt et al., looking at higher education in Kansas City. It is the belief at Kauffman, you have been a leader in this as well, that education, maybe culture it doesn't matter because education can overcome it, because if you get education right, you can advance.
Yeah, and it's important in the United States, you know, and there, again, it's the spirit of Mr. Kauffman sitting next to me at my desk. I don't want to sound cult-like, right? But someplace breathing around us is the spirit of Mr. Kauffman's mother, who was an avid reader and taught Ewing Kauffman to be a voracious reader. And that's the other half of our...
He spent a year in bed when he was
reading.
13, I think it was, reading. His mother brought him books from the Westport Library, from the Kansas City Public Library.
The order of 10 a week.
10 a week,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. He said that, he once told me that was his real education, was that year he spent in bed, and his mother brought him, and he became a great reader.
And that's something.
So what do we do about education to help economic growth, to maintain our position in the world, and to help the rest of the world? I mean,
You know, some days
what's
I
the
think
answer?
Mr. Kauffman was one of the smartest people who must have ever lived. Now, he was a great, smart businessman, but he saw for us, it's in our charter, the intertwining of economic growth and entrepreneurship and education. And the reason we do education is Mr. Kauffman believed that people weren't going to be competent economic citizens if they weren't well educated. It's as simple as that. And that education really, really, really mattered in economic growth. Now, he predates in this vision a lot of the human capital theory of economists, okay? And in a sense, we all think it's common sense now. That's, of course, what happens when a great innovation, an intellectual innovation happens. But Mr. Kauffman was also wise in saying the foundation is not likely to change education across the world or the nation. But if it does experiments and if it does innovations in Kansas City, we can make Kansas City the model city for education. And that's why we commit all of our money in the education frontier, largely in Kansas City. That's why we're the instrumentality of bringing Teach for America to Kansas City. We have 175 teachers from Teach for America in Kansas City. The KIPP schools,
on a per capita basis, I think is the highest concentration of
country.
Teach for America.
Right. And you know, those things aren't easy. We struggle with the school boards because, you know, a lot of times Teach for America teachers aren't very welcome. But that's our drive in education, and we do it in a very experimental way.
And you're circling back to one of Ewing Kauffman's original ideas. He was a big supporter of the Westport School, and some people in the room will remember that he at one point offered every graduate of the Westport School
Project Choice.
Project Choice in college education and whatnot. And you're now starting a charter school. It is somewhat in the model of what he originally tried to do. What's the centerpiece of the charter school?
Well, the charter school evolves from when I got here. The Project Choice thing had been abandoned by the trustees, and I can never figure out why. This was Mr. Kauffman's pet program. You help poor kids after school, and you help get them in college, and then you sustain them in college. So we restarted it. We call it Kauffman Scholars, and at the moment we have 1,800 kids in Kansas City, Missouri, in intense after-school and Saturday supplemental work. That's actually my phone. Anyway,
It's Ewing.
It could be.
Yeah.
I've never had a phone call from him, but I never publicly
Tonight,
have talked
he
about
told
it
me he
like
was
this.
calling.
So there you have it. Anyway. It's that time of year, I suppose. Anyway, so you know, our sort of outcome of running that, as I've asked the people there, could we do better at this? And the answer always says is, you know, we get these kids at 3 o'clock. If we had these kids every day for the whole day, we could really make a difference. And that's what the seeds of the Kauffman Charter School, where we basically said, you know, we got to run a charter school. We got to start a school, because then we can actually work with some kids all day long. And you know, the device of a charter school, they're somewhat controversial. I don't think they ought to be. The record as I read it is pretty clear. They're fantastic. The good ones. The bad ones are just as bad and sometimes worse than public schools. But the good ones can be a model for real change. And you know, so we hope to run the best charter school. Just another view about how we do things carefully. That staff that was there to meet kids for the first time in the first week of September had occupied our school. The whole staff had been hired and occupied, hired from all over the place, mostly from out of town. A lot of Teach for America people in there. They worked together every day from the 1st of April, in that building together, getting ready for their first class on September 1st. We had huge advantages. We had our building. A lot of things that break up charter schools is they can't get the building straight. The Kauffman Foundation actually created a bond insurance fund for charter schools. So across the country, there's something like 60 or 80 charter schools that at least got their building because of the Kauffman Foundation. The building's a big thing. Most charters are organized by parents.
Usually not included in the public funding for charter schools.
Yeah. So, and ours wasn't. And then, you know, so we think, assembled the best instructional staff, the best administrative staff, and let's keep our fingers crossed. If we do it, we hope to be a guiding light for all the other charter schools in the city. And as I say, we'll have our experience under our belt, and with good luck, there'll be Kauffman 2, and Kauffman 3, and Kauffman 4, and God knows what'll happen after that.
Well, maybe it gets some educated
We might have
kids.
a real educational system in Kansas City.
Now, before we wind up, there's one other thing I'd like you to talk about briefly, which is in itself an incredible entrepreneurial endeavor and might help make Kansas City a cradle of entrepreneurs once again, as it had been in the age of Ewan Kauffman and Henry Block and others. And that is the Google Fiber event, the OMG event. You've probably seen some of those billboards put up by Kauffman. So talk about that oh my God event of Google Fiber. How did we get Google Fiber here, and what do you think the results
One
will be?
reason we got Google Fiber here is we told, Kauffman was instrumental, very instrumental in this. A lot of stuff happened in our building. And I don't think, frankly, they'd be here if it wasn't for the Kauffman Foundation. And I say that because we have a certain sparkle in the world of entrepreneuring. And, you know, if you go to Silicon Valley and you say, I'm from Kansas City, someone will say, do you know the Kauffman Foundation? Okay. But we told a story about Kansas City, and one of the locators of this who was particularly effective was Mayor Reardon. The Google people told me they talked to 1,200 mayors. He stood out above all 1,200. And partly how he talked about his city as a business. I deliver infrastructure. That's the business I'm in. You want to do infrastructure? That's what Google Cable is. You come here. And those of you who know Mayor Reardon know there's somebody particularly special over there. And I think on our side, we have a really first-class mayor here who, within his first 5 days, was fully up to speed on the whole Google potential, whatever it is, which I'll talk about in a second. But the story we told, which I think knocked the socks off of Google, is when they got here, unlike almost all the other cities, and there were like 1,200 cities in the running, the story we told was a story about a city that had been entrepreneurial from its roots. And, you know, I came here from Baltimore, which is where the Johns Hopkins University is, and I like to tell this story. If you take an assembly of equal number of people, and we were to be at the Enoch Pratt Library in downtown Baltimore tonight, and I said to that crowd, name Baltimore's entrepreneurs. This will be hard for you as Kansas Cityans to appreciate. You could well be, in a group you're big, this size, nobody could get past Kevin Plank. Kevin Plank invented Under Armour in Baltimore, and he makes it. That's the growing company in Baltimore. Okay? I said, is there anybody else here that could think? Maybe they'd say Chip Mason, he put together Legg Mason Funds. And I said, okay, let's name some dead entrepreneurs in Baltimore. Okay? Maybe somebody'd say T. Rowe Price. Okay, somebody say, oh, McCormick. We make spice here. There must have been a McCormick Was there a McCormick? Must be, there's a name on the building, McCormick. Okay, but you can't name, the names don't come. I know I'm looking aphasic, I'm doing that for dramatic purposes, okay? Nobody in this room can't name 5, and many of you can name 20. And some of you could probably go for broke and say, okay, I can do 20 dead and 20 living. Some of you can do this. Crosby could do 40 in both categories, okay? But the point is, this is deeply rooted in the culture of the city, and we told the story based on that observation. That if you think about it, you can walk the streets of the city and run into Barnett Hellsberg and the team that put Cerner together, and there's Henry Block. You want to talk to him? Okay. And there's Jim Stowers, okay? And oh, by the way, did you know Garmin is here? Those 2 founders, they're at their desks today. And there's Tom McDonald. He was the first and only president of DST, right? You want to talk to him? Okay, he's my age, he's very vital, he'll talk to you, okay? And the city's jam-packed with people, but more importantly, we talk about it here. There are a lot of cities that still have a lot of entrepreneurs, but outside the Silicon Valley, okay, I'm not sure there's another city that sees itself with these entrepreneurial lenses. And I think this was the significant sort of story we told, and I don't think we're through, by the way. Happily, Mayor James has declared us the entrepreneurial city. And I think we have every historic claim to say that, but that, I think, lays the ground for us into the future. And that's part of what Google is. If you talk about our assets, and by the way, there's no walking person who has any clue about what this means, what Google is, okay? We know we're going to have high-speed fiber optics into every home in the city, okay? What's it mean? Well, I don't know, but I think we know already that entrepreneurs are coming to check it out. What are they going to do here? Are we going to have new technologies that basically mean that all of us can just sort of in the morning spit on a little pad and it's over at KU and they send back a message, you're okay today, dress up, okay? Or, you know, come immediately to KU, right? Or St. Luke's, I don't mean to favor one hospital over other. We have no idea what this means, okay? One of the ideas that comes out of Mike Chesser, who runs the Power and Light Company, is we're the first place on earth that can actually pull data back from our customers in terms of utility use. Well, it could be we're the first place on earth that actually has a fully integrated pricing schedule that everybody in the city implicitly knows because you got machines in your house that basically help you use your electricity. And as Mike says, you know, I run a power system that has to generate enough electricity to keep this city air conditioned at 112 degrees, okay? Now, on an afternoon the 2nd of November, that means we probably have 50% redundant generating capacity in Kansas City. It's not efficient. If you could have total utility use information constantly fed back, we could all be much better off, i.e. all of our electricity bills would be down. We would be spending a lot less belching of carbon. We would have a lot less capital investment costs. The city would become more efficient, and guess what? It would become a magnet for more business. And we'd become a city of smarter people. Let me just say one last thing about that. You know, it's estimated that the cognitive challenge in America with all of this stuff, iPads, telephones, cell phones, our IQ as a society keeps going up, largely just because of the cognitive challenge of dealing with technology. I think there's a parallel here, that the cognitive challenge of living in a city of entrepreneurs should make everybody in Kansas City just a touch smarter. And it should be a city where kids don't live the history I lived, that, you know, I'm going to be a safe professor. We should have a higher number of kids in this city saying, I'm going to do the unsafe thing. I'm going to try to be an entrepreneur. And I just would say one other thing, because we're drawn to the conclusions and so forth. You know what an entrepreneur does? They bring forth new things, that's for sure. And you already heard that they make business and they make jobs. You can't make jobs without business. And new firms make lots more jobs than old firms. And by the way, we talked about Mr. Kauffman and Mr. Gates in terms of their legacy. You know, both Kauffman and Gates, but particularly Kauffman, when asked about what he achieved, same thing with John Rockefeller, I gave secure employment to hundreds of people. Now, Ewing Kauffman was born very poor. John Rockefeller was born in destitute poverty, in a little crossroads, about 30 minutes from Cornell University. And if you think about that, these are guys who actually knew as children what hand to mouth meant. And at the end of their days, they were rich. But, you know, Mr. Kauffman had one giant funeral, and one reason was there are so many people still this day feel the big bang of Ewing Kauffman on their family. They may be a little wealthier, but they grew up with strong kids, they kept strong families because they worked at Marion Laboratories. And Ewing Kauffman internalized that. God, did he love that. And the outreach of his foundation was basically make that for more people through the hands of entrepreneurs and help them get there through education. So I don't, you know, net, are we lucky to live in a city that had Ewing Kauffman?
Well, I agree with that. And Carl, it seems to me, I remember I taught English in China in 1984 when it was still essentially a communist country, and I remember asking my students, sophomores at the university, what they wanted to be, what their vision for the future was, and they couldn't answer the question because they'd been taught that the party would find them a spot. And you quote in one of your writings, you quote Robert Lucas, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, as saying that what entrepreneurs can do is imagine the future, even through failure and creative disruption and destruction, they can imagine the future. And I want to say, I think that what Kauffman has done under your leadership in education, in entrepreneurship, in technology, is help this community and the national community imagine the future. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Schramm.